Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever in the world you are. Tonight, I would like to discuss something that Dr. Simba Makoni, an ex Zanu PF minister, said on an interview with Trevor. Just listen to this.
I recall very clearly that when we came into office in 1980, we inherited Ian Smith systems. And Ian Smith's ministers drove Peugeot 504s. They drove themselves from home to work in their Land Rovers and all kinds. Most of them were farmers. They parked their Land Rover and then they used the government vehicle when they were at work with a chauffeur. When they finished at night, they packed them and they took theirs to go. Within the month of our coming into office, Prime Minister Mugabe then directed that every minister be issued with an E-class Mercedes-Benz. And the Peugeot 504s were retired to permanent secretaries, and the deputy ministers then took over. We can also look at many other things, small they may appear at the time. Let me hazard that even at that point, Sinkala was our Minister of Finance. I don't think we knew what budget we inherited from Ian Smith when the decision was taken to buy those E-class fleets for the ministers. So the material, affection for material things has always been with us. And the differentiation also, even going back into the camps, Zemashefu, my comrades Makada were not the same. So much so that even today, when the so-called Minister for Presidential Affairs or Provincial Governor, as they were, goes to Bubi or Binga, they will be served separately and differently from the other people. The avarice grew as we began to exploit the opportunities of office. When I was in the government, the minister was allocated one vehicle that they kept, which was the sedan they used in town. If you needed to go off-road, then your ministry hired off-road vehicles from the CMED, and you were charged for it. Now a minister will have an average of 4 vehicles in his forecourt, all at government's expense.
So the leadership modeled the wrong kind of behavior, and that kind of behavior permeated all across our society. Our CEOs, like you're saying, heads of parastatals and so forth, modeled from the top.
Indeed. I made a passing reference that we have CEOs who will buy themselves a luxury car when they can't pay wages at the end of the week or end of the month. This has been so entrenched in our psyche, this showing off, as if you are a different person, you're breathing different air from those who don't drive Prados and Land Cruisers, from those who don't drive Jeep Cherokees. We have lost our humanity. There's lots of reference to Ubuntu, very farcical, superficial, not coming from the heart. We have changed. We have changed because of our appetite for power. And we have changed because of our avarice for material things. I think when we begin to associate a position of authority and responsibility with material well-being and acquisitions. That's when the rot set in. A Toyota Cressida isn't worth much compared to 6 kgs of gold and 15 billion worth of Marangwe diamonds and backhanders on contracts to pave 200 kilometers of roads. So when you ask, is there a moment? There is not one, but quite clearly, I think we began to change noticeably in the latter half of the 80s into the early 90s. Our character became preoccupied with power, with control, and with accumulation. That's where I would put the starting line.
There we have it. I think it's an interesting discussion that we should take seriously. But what Simba Makoni failed to say there as well is that the political patronage system worked very much in Zanu PF's favor, or Mugabe's favor in this particular case. Because after he had bought them these E-class Mercedes-Benz and so forth, he did buy their silence. And it is on record that Mugabe was able to do as he pleased. That cabinet was so powerless that it never really challenged him in any meaningful way. This was best exemplified by Margaret Dongo when she described Zanu PF MPs and ministers as murivakadzi vaMugabe, Mugabe's concubines. And that point, some people laughed at it and went on, but actually people should pay attention to it because she was absolutely right. Mugabe's cabinet had become so utterly useless that it never challenged him in any meaningful way on anything. Yes, he gave them E-class Mercedes-Benz, but when he started looting, building himself the blue roof mansion worth US $4 billion, they did not say anything. Even on issues such as the Gukurahundi massacre in 1983 to 1987, the cabinet was silent. This was a cabinet that had become so utterly useless. This went on and happened also during the GNU. When Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends, their primary task in joining the GNU was to implement the democratic reforms to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. But Mugabe gave them the same treatment as he had given his own Zanu PF colleagues. E-class limousines for the ministers, generous salaries and allowances, and for Morgan Tsvangirai himself, a US $4 million mansion in Highlands. And Tsvangirai and company threw all ideas of implementing the democratic reforms out of the window. They were his new concubines and they were not going to rock the boat. As one of the Zanu PF cronies boasted during the GNU when he was asked why was MDC not implementing the reforms, he said, Mazivanhu eMDC adzidza kudya anyerere. In other words, MDC leaders have learned to enjoy the gravy train trappings of life. They will never rock the boat. And lo and behold, they didn't. They didn't fail to implement even one meaningful democratic reform. Mnangagwa is a buffoon. I'm the first one to admit it. But he was smart enough to know the importance of the political patronage system he inherited from Mugabe. And he has been smart enough to keep it. And now he's working to his own advantage. MDC leaders failed to implement the democratic reforms during the GNU. And Mugabe in 2018 made sure that he kept up the bribes so that they went into the 2013 election knowing that Zanu PF was rigging the elections, but he was still generous enough to allow the opposition to win a few seats. And that was the reason why they participated, even though they knew the elections were flawed. And the same was to happen in 2018. Mnangagwa, it was clear Mnangagwa was rigging those elections. He failed to implement even one meaningful reform. And he went on to bribe the chiefs with the Queen Cab Isuzu trucks, just as Mugabe promised the chiefs. But he also saw to it that the opposition would win a few gravy train seats, and so kept them participating. And after the 2018, Mnangagwa went even one step further. He decided to reward the losing candidates of the presidential race by creating Pollard, which is meant just to reward those who lost the presidential elections and keep them interested. These 2023 elections, Mnangagwa is assured that regardless of how much the evidence is that he's rigging these elections, they will participate. And they are participating. That is the tragedy. Regardless of the knowledge they know that these elections are flawed, Zanu PF is rigging them, and that they are only participating to give Zanu PF legitimacy, they will still, regardless, participate. I think there will be no free, fair, and credible elections in Zimbabwe until we implement the democratic reforms, which is not meant only to free state institutions like ZEC, the police, from Zanu PF control, but it is also meant to free the MDC/CCC concubines, Zanu PF concubines. Because as long as the present system continues with these CCC concubines participating for the sake of the few gravy train seats that are available, Zanu PF knows that it doesn't have to worry about implementing any meaningful reforms. They will participate and guarantee him legitimacy. The challenge really now is also on the people themselves waking up to that reality that MDC, Triple C will never implement any meaningful reforms. They will never, they've abandoned the idea of free, fair, and credible elections. All they are after is the few seats, gravy train seats that Zanu PF is giving away as a reward. That is the truth. That is the challenge that we are facing. 2023 elections, Zanu PF is rigging them, and we are not going to stop the Triple C concubines participating in these elections. Doesn't matter how flawed the process gets, they will participate. Our challenge really is to make sure that everybody knows that this election process is flawed. That's number one. Number two, that the in these flawed elections out of greed, nothing else. And the two combined, a flawed election process, a discredited opposition, surely cannot justify giving Zanu PF legitimacy at the end of the day. And that argument is what we've got to take, particularly to the SADC leaders, who are, as we know, in the past they have endorsed these flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. We must make sure that our SADC friends have no excuse this time for endorsing flawed elections just to give Zanu PF legitimacy. Thank you and good night.